Signori, benvenuti a questa nuova reaction. Non so che dire. Ieri sera mi sono preso una pizza. Sono stato invitato a sta roba che faceva la roba di scherma, la roba di scherma in cui vado. Vabbè, ovviamente ci sono andato contro voglia come. Vabbè, però era una cena gigante. E vabbè, vabbè, ovviamente, come dire, ho preso, sì, la pizza è arrivata dopo tipo 2 ore perché era successo tanto, vabbè, era una giga festa, tra l'altro in un posto dove c'ero già andato perché sì, là, là ci faceva sì, sì, credo che là ci ha fatto tipo, ci faceva le comunioni tipo degli amici dei miei genitori, quindi sì, come dire, era a conoscenza del posto. Ovviamente anche a quelle due comunioni sono andato contro voglia, ma. Ragazzi, e che vedevo di? Che vedevo di? Che vedevo di? Ma vabbè ragazzi, a parte comunioni e cose varie, signori, oggi ci raggiamo a questa seconda parte sulle sette psicopatiche che sono attive ancora oggi. Il buon Dantevius, vi dico che c'è un altro video di Dantevius in questa playlist, ovvero quello dell'iceberg di 4chan, che non so se reagirmi, però perché come dire, il suo stile di video, come dire, non è come molti iceberg, non lo so, vediamo ragazzi, vediamo, perché un iceberg di 4chan stuzzica tanto, ma vedremo ragazzi, vedremo. Intanto, let's go,
There are up
immergiamoci.
to 10,000 cults currently active in the United States alone. Chances are there's a cult pretty close to you and you don't even know it. About a year
Beh,
ago, I made a video about cults that are still active today, and there was a lot of them that I left out, so consider this a sequel. Cults
ok.
2, Foya Edu, Electric Boogaloo.
Proprio le due robe da mettere per un sequel, proprio. Love Asumon.
Born in 1975, Amy Carlson led a relatively unremarkable life. Like a lot of other people who didn't have fulfillment in their lives, Amy turned to spirituality and started spending a lot
Ovviamente.
of time in New Age forums. It was in one of these
Ah,
forums where she met Amaranth White Eagle. He
ma che barba c'ha sto
slid in
qua?
her DMs and convinced her that she was the so called mother god to Amaranth's father god. This man had riz straight out of the fifth dimension. After talking to White Eagle for a few months, Amy made a forum post claiming that a disembodied voice had talked to her. I'm cleaning the kitchen and I feel a tap on my shoulder and a whisk of air in my left ear. And then I heard a lower tone voice. Not really even a voice, it was like a message a violin would play in its music. It said, President of the United States. And I said, What? What in the world
Ma?
does that mean? I dismissed it, and then I hear, You are going to be President of the United States.
Ah,
Spoiler alert, she did not become president.
Eh, povera, povera, povera Kamala, poverina, Eh, va- vabbè, ma soprattutto guardando come sta la situazione, vabbè, ragazzi.
Instead of seeking a psychiatrist, Amy decided to abandon her three children and go live with White Eagle. Together, the two of
Bene.
them moved to Crestone, Colorado, and they started a YouTube channel. Unfortunately,
Ah,
I couldn't find any of their earlier videos, but I
quindi,
assume it was just both of them talking about typical New Age nonsense. They were able
quei video, tipo il canale YouTube di Adam Cadmon, me l'immagino, cioè. Madonna, mi devo guardare il video di YouTube su Adam Cadmon, io non ce la faccio.
to gain a small following, but in 2014, the duo split up, and Amy formed her own religion called
Ah.
Love Has Won. Alright, let's do a quick lore dump. According to Amy, she was born 19 billion years ago and is
Ah,
the creator
19
of
miliardi.
everything. She has been reincarnated a total of 534 times,
534 volte.
previously living as Cleopatra, Marilyn Monroe, and even Jesus Christ. Now,
Proprio che è tipo il Doctor Who che prima è donna, poi è cioè, no, che è bisex.
why
Cioè.
they always gotta bring Jesus into this, man?
Gesù, sempre Gesù, 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 Gesù.
Amy
Oh.
once again returned to humanity to help us ascend to a higher dimension, specifically the fifth dimension. She also claimed to have healing powers and could apparently communicate with the dead, including Robin Williams, who, by the way, also happens to be an archangel.
Perché una setta che c'ha Robin Williams Arcangelo? Un po' di rispetto per Robin. Ora che la casetta avrà Gigi Proietti Arcangelo, ecco che sì, vabbè, da dire, perché Proietti e Williams hanno entrambi fatto il genio di Aladdin, sì.
Man, that was a lot. This time around, Amy was much more successful in attracting followers, and she started moving people into her house. Around 2018, she started live streaming, and everyone in the house would appear on camera.
Come le
And watching
live.
clips of these streams is just like a window into hell, man. It's so weird to watch. Every member of the cult had to refer to Amy as Mother or Mother God, and her boyfriend, Jason Castillo, as Father God. These live streams also exposed a lot of the abusive behavior that was going on inside the house. Her boyfriend, Jason, was, to put it mildly, a real putz. He constantly threatened other members with violence.
I have an info ball waiting for you in your right temple. Do you want it?
Oh cazzo.
I got one waiting for the left. And it's going to take half your body up. You're going to be a paraplegic. You're only going to have the right usage of your leg and arm.
No, madò, ma è brutale sto qua. Cioè.
And I love you.
Amy herself also wasn't shy of verbally abusing her disciples.
My vision was chicken parmesan. So the fucking atoms turn around on me and get me meatballs. I didn't say meatballs. I love meatballs. But I didn't fucking say that. Chicken parmesan.
As you can see, these two were really unhinged. There's even clips of them punishing a kid by locking him in a closet when he misbehaves.
Father.
Madonna, ma abuso incredibile, cioè.
You got the timer, 2 minutes?
Yeah, I got it.
Scusate, aspetta.
Because of all this abuse, there was a high rate of turnover in the house. And by the way, this was like a 2-bedroom condo. It's not like one of those classic cult compounds. But yeah,
Vabbè, sì, un po' come la mia casa praticamente, che c'è?
there's a lot of people coming in and out all the time. And one of those people was a fella by the name of Jason Whitman. In 2020, he left his family to join the cult and started regularly appearing on stream, but only for a few days before he completely disappeared. And I'm not just talking from the streams, but like in general. He was later found on some Walter White shit, wandering in the desert naked, high out of his mind.
Ma
They
come?
left him there to die, and when police asked them about it, they lied about his whereabouts, all because the guy had, quote, bad vibrations. Luckily, Jason made a full recovery and went back to his family.
Cosa?
Happy ending. But unfortunately,
Bene.
he was the only one that would have a happy ending. Soon after the Jason fiasco, Amy started to appear on camera less and less. Her health had been deteriorating for years. By the end of 2020, she couldn't even walk anymore. And according to Love Is One lore, this was because Amy had been absorbing the world's negative energy, and it was starting to take a toll on her physical body. But in reality, there was a much simpler explanation. Silver! She had been consuming copious amounts of colloidal silver, so
La madonna, è come quello il dittatore là che mangiava le... Cioè, Maro.
much so that her skin had turned blue. Why? I have no
È
idea.
diventato un puffo.
Maybe she was afraid of turning into a werewolf or something. Also, silver was not the only thing she was addicted to. She was also doing a ton of alcohol and drugs, and she admitted to spending as much as $1,000 per day on DMT, aka Joe Rogan miracle drug.
Ma che è? Ma cioè? Sta qua si voleva praticamente suicidare.
It cost me $600 to $1,000 a day to get the THC. Because,
A day.
yes.
Then, on April 28th, 2021, shit really hit the fan. One of Amy's followers went to the local police station and told them there was a dead body in his house. So, the police searched the home, and in the middle of the house, they found a shrine with Amy's mummified body placed at the center of an altar. Bet you weren't expecting that. They put her decomposing body in a sleeping bag and wrapped it in Christmas lights.
Ma...
Autopsy revealed that she had passed away from a mix of alcohol abuse, anorexia, and chronic colloidal silver ingestion. Or, as the cult itself puts it, she ascended to the fifth dimension. After Amy's passing, the cult split in two. One group called Joy Reigns, led by Father God Jason Castillo, and the other one is called 5D Full Disclosure, run by two women in Carlson's inner circle.
Branch divisions.
The Branch Davidians are infamous for the siege of Waco, where hundreds of law enforcement surrounded their compound for over a month, ending with the deaths of 80 people, including 24 children. It's widely considered one of the biggest f***ups the U.S. government has ever made. Right up there with the Iraq War and letting women vote.
No!
I didn't originally plan on including them in this video, but the siege of Waco affected how law enforcement handled other similar situations that are going to come up later in the video. So I figured I might as well give a short rundown of what happened.
Okay.
So let's start at the beginning. No story that has started with this one guy from Bulgaria has ever had a happy ending. In 1930, this one guy from Bulgaria named Victor Utev split off from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He claimed that the end of the world was
la Bulgaria è la causa di ogni male nel mondo.
Soon, and that Victor and his followers would reestablish the kingdom of David after the apocalypse. Thus came his group's name, the Davidians. It was actually Victor who purchased the now infamous compound near Waco, Texas, and named it Mount Carmel, which is kind of an ironic name because there's nothing sweet about it. After Victor's death, one of his followers, Ben Roden, claimed that God told him to continue Utev's work. So he created his own branch of the Davidians called the Branch Davidians. Then, in 1981, a fellow by the name of Vernon Howell joined the BDs. And wouldn't you know it, God also spoke to him and told him that he should be the leader. So, old Vernon changed his name to David Koresh and took control of the group. Now, Mr. Koresh followed in the footsteps of King David by having a bunch of wives and concubines. Let's just say he kept busy, fathering at least 13 children. And aside from fathering...
Mamma mia, una macchina da riproduzione umana.
Children, apparently he was also sleeping with them, because one of his wives was reportedly as young as 13. Now, the government had heard rumors of David's proclivities for a while, but it wasn't the pedo stuff that would be his undoing. What really bothered them was rumors that the Davidians had a massive stockpile of illegal weapons that they were going to potentially use in a holy war or something. So the ATF,
the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms,
got an arrest warrant for David Koresh and planned to conduct a raid on the compound to find out...
Cioè, cose pedofile? Nah. Armi? Oh yes. In realtà è un problema. Gli Stati Uniti hanno entrambi questi problemi in realtà, ma dettagli.
Those illegal weapons. Now, David would often leave this compound by himself to go run errands in a nearby town, and you would think that the ATF would just wait until he did that and arrest him in town. But no, they decided to plan a full-on raid of the Davidian compound to serve him the warrant, and it was scheduled for February 28th, 1993. But the Davidians got tipped off that this was going to go down, so they were expecting them. When ATF agents showed up at the compound, chaos ensued. What was supposed to be a routine search/arrest warrant serving turned into a full-on gunfight that lasted over 2 hours and resulted in the deaths of 6 Davidians and 4 ATF agents, not to mention dozens of injuries. Now, from this point on, there are basically 2 versions of this story, the government's version and the Davidians' version. According to the ATF, the heavily armed cult members were waiting in ambush as the agents unloaded from their vehicles. Koresh was outside on the porch as the agents approached, telling him they had a search warrant and instructing him to get down. He retreated inside the house, and gunfire burst through the door as agents approached. One agent was wounded, and here's the account from one of the Davidians who was actually there. I could hear David's steps going down the hall towards the front door. Then all of a sudden I hear David say, "Hey, wait a minute, there are women and children in here." Then all hell broke loose, just a barrage of shots from outside coming in. It sounded like a bloodbath. After about 2.5 hours and countless rounds of ammunition, the ATF called for a ceasefire, at which point Koresh released 24 members to the authorities, mostly children. Unfortunately, this would be the last good thing that happens throughout this whole ordeal. After a brief respite, the FBI stepped in and took over from the ATF
Oh,
Schlemiels.
cazzo.
What followed was a full-blown siege. The FBI assembled the largest military operation against a civilian target ever. Over 890 federal and local law enforcement, complete with military-grade weapons and armored tanks, surrounded the compound 24 hours a day.
Cazzo.
The FBI tried all sorts of techniques to get the Davidians to surrender, including, and I am not making this up, blasting shitty music on repeat to try and drive them crazy. I imagine it went something like this.
Oddio. What you know about rolling down in the deep
After
when you...
51 days and no progress, shit finally hit the fan. Federal agents started throwing tear gas into the main building on the compound, trying to smoke the Davidians out. It caught fire, and 70 people, including children, lost their lives. Some of them died from bullets. Only 9 people were able to escape from the burning building, and they were immediately arrested. Now, just like the shootout earlier, this also has 2 versions. The government's version is that Koresh ordered his followers to set the building on fire and kill themselves, and that the feds only used tear gas after the fire had already started. This is according to the ATF's website. The Davidian compound erupted in fires set by the cult members, as law enforcement attempted to force them out by introducing tear gas into the building. The fire destroyed the compound, and more than 70 residents were killed, many from gunshot wounds, apparently inflicted by fellow cult members. On the other hand, it's argued that the fire was started by the tear gas itself, which is highly flammable, and those gunshots that were supposedly inflicted by fellow cult members were caused by the feds themselves. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to the story than this, but I'm trying to keep this video under an hour, so I have to cut some parts out.
Invece è più di è 1 ora e 10, quindi come dite?
Man, all this talk.
No, non mi voglio, no, fanculo gli sponsor.
Code 50 Dantavius for 50% off plus free shipping.
Ok. Nuobian Nation.
It's a group that has published piles of newsletters and writes favorably about bits and pieces of all the world's major religions. The group's leader is described as more than a teacher. He is the supreme grand master.
Depending on who you ask, Malachi Z. York is either a pedophilic, black supremacist criminal, or he's the living God incarnate who came to Earth to save his people from evil. Either way, he's in prison now. Spoiler alert. But let's see how he ended up there, and you can judge if he deserved it or not.
Ok.
The
New
year
York.
is 1965.
Ok,
White York has
1965.
just been sentenced to prison on charges of statutory rape, possession of an illegal weapon, and resisting arrest. While
Ok, iniziamo subito che si è fatto arrestare per pedofilia, quindi
inside, he
perfetto.
was exposed to the teachings of the Nation of Islam, a
Oh,
black
cazzo.
nationalist group which believes that white people are devils created by an evil scientist, among other things.
Sì, come dire, è un gruppo un po' estremista. È per questo che quando si parla del movimento di diritti civili ti diranno sempre Martin Luther King, perché come dire, c'è anche del marcio in quel movimento.
After being released from prison, York supported himself by peddling African perfumes door to door. That was too small time for him. He had bigger dreams. So eventually he went from peddling sense to peddling knowledge. York took what he learned from other black nationalist sects and started his own religious group called Ansar Pure Sufi, and gave himself the title Isa Abdullah. A year later, he changed the group's name to the Nubian Islamic Hebrews and incorporated a bunch of Jewish stuff into his lore. This man really could not decide which religion he wanted to copy, so he mixed them all together like a theological turducken. For the
Confusianesimo, ecco qua.
next few years, he would keep randomly changing his entire belief system at the drop of a pin. Until one day, in 1973, when he had an epiphany. While York was on a trip in Egypt, he claims that the Archangel Michael appeared to him and basically basically told him that he's alien Jesus and that only he could save the Nubian people from the coming apocalypse. Oh, the Nubians are the
Apocalisse.
Nubians, aka the black people. After
Ah,
this
ok.
revelation, York legally changed his name to Dr. Malachi Z. York and gave himself
Dottor Malachi.
a new title, Imam Isa al-Sadi al-Mahdi, and
Imam.
had his followers dressed in traditional Islamic clothing. Okay, so you're probably wondering what these people even believed. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. Go watch this other video I made for a more in-depth explanation. In the beginning, there was Anu, aka Allah. Anu
Allah.
created the Anunnaki, also known as angels. Billions of years ago, the Anunnaki would come to Earth on their spaceship Nibiru and blow it up.
Astronave, perfetto. Devo sempre pure menzionare astronave, che è Star
And they
Trek.
repopulated the Earth with black people, which were the original people. Later on, an evil scientist named Yaqub would create white people because he was sick of getting made fun of for his huge head. Also, the Earth is hollow and full of leprechauns and unicorns and other cryptids. No, I'm not making that up at all. It's very intricate. That's only like 0.001% of the lore, okay? This shit goes so deep. This guy wrote like 100 books and countless scrolls back to the brim with schizophrenic ramblings, okay?
Mamma mia, Sabaku, leggi tutto.
Like, it's a shame this dude decided to be a cult leader because he would have had a great career as a science fiction writer. From 1973 to 1994, York saw huge growth in his movement. He was attracting hundreds of followers in New York City. And at one point, they owned a whole block in Brooklyn. This community, now known as the Ansaru Allah community, was pretty closed off from the rest of the world. They had their own schools, restaurants, newspapers. They even had their own language called Nubic, which York invented. So, as you can see, York was a pretty busy guy. But the one thing he always had time for was copious amounts of intercourse. You see, our boy Malachi was one horny mother sucker, okay? This guy was doing more bag shots than Wilt Chamberlain in his prime. It's claimed that he has 50 wives and multiple side pieces.
50! 50!
Including the wives of other members. Plus, he fathered about 200 children, and it was...
Aspetta, con 200 bambini puoi coprire tipo la città di che ne so, qualche città italiana. Aspetta, città italiana meno popolata, ecco qua. Allora, può coprire Morterone, non entrerebbe nella top 98 di Wikipedia. Attenzione. Cioè, può coprire tante città. Va bene, abbiamo capito. Vabbè.
Addiction to back shots that would end up being his undoing. Foreshadowing. Wait, is this...
qualche malattia sessualmente trasmissibile.
Foreshadowing if you mentioned that it's foreshadowing. I don't know, whatever, let's move on. Despite clearly being a culty...
Può coprire la città di Aieta, aspetta, 200 figli. No.
Saru Allah community had a positive effect on the neighborhood. They helped the poorer black people of Brooklyn stay off the streets and provided them with a sense of purpose. At one point, the mayor of New York City even recognized Malachi for what he was doing for the community. But not everyone was happy
dato le
about
chiavi, cioè.
the Nubians taking over. One person in particular was Horace Green, a daycare teacher who was described as a pillar of the community. Horace was found shot twice, execution style, right outside of his daycare. Green was a vocal critic of the Ansars and felt that York was ruining the neighborhood. Horace's killer was never caught, but according to the FBI, it was one of York's men who did the deed. The Ansars were also accused of a bunch of other things like welfare fraud, running a protection racket, arson, extortion, emulating Nintendo games, and the list goes on. And it
Emulazione di giochi
wasn't just Horace
Nintendo.
Green that had a problem with York. He was also hated by Muslims. Despite claiming to be a Muslim himself, York's teachings are considered extremely haram by mainstream Muslims. York would have conflicts with local Muslim groups until 1993, when he would completely denounce Islam. Completely. And the reason why is actually kind of insane, okay? So let's do a little bit of a side story here. On November 5th, 1990, Meir Kahane, founder of the Jewish Defense League, was giving a speech in Brooklyn. The crowd was mostly Orthodox Jews, with one exception, El Said Nossair. After Kahane finished his speech, Nossair, disguised as a Hasidic Jew, went up and shot him in the face.
Oh
In front of the
cazzo!
whole crowd, and then he somehow got away. Now,
Ah, è stato pure coinvolto nel bombardamento del 93 del World Trade Center, ok.
well, Meir Kahane was an ultra-right-wing extremist who advocated for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, and the JDL
Oh
is
cazzo!
literally considered a terrorist organization. So, it's not really surprising that he got whacked, but what does this have to do with our boy Malachi? Well, literally, the day before Kahane's assassination, Nossair showed up to the Ansar Allah headquarters and asked for a meeting with York. But I guess York took too long putting on his turban, so he had to reschedule the meeting. After Kahane's murder the very next day, York realized that Nossair was probably there to whack him too, and he was anti-Muslim after that. The next week, York would publish a book denouncing Islam called 360 Questions to Ask a Muslim. He then rebranded his whole entire religion again to the Nawubian Nation of Moors, and reverted back to the more Jewish influence. He was no
Cioè,
longer
letteralmente cambia... Seguo tutte le religioni, seguo tutte le religioni. Rabbi, Papa, Lama, Imam, Natana, Sura, Torah, Pane, Vilo, Kasha.
an imam, but a rabbi instead.
Ah, mo un
Malachi
rabbino.
decided that New York was too hot, so he took 100 of his most loyal followers and moved them outside of Atlanta to a 500-acre ranch. They then proceeded to build an Egyptian-themed compound complete with 2 giant pyramids. But these pyramids weren't just for decoration. They were also beacons that would signal to an alien spaceship to pick up York and his followers and save them from the coming apocalypse. Now, even though this compound, known as Tamarid, was Egyptian-themed, at the same time the
Sembra un parco acquatico, cioè...
claimed that they were Native Americans and that York was a direct descendant of Pocahontas. Yeah, he insisted to be called Chief Black Eagle, and his followers swapped their Middle Eastern clothing to blue jeans and cowboy hats. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dantavius is really handsome. And also, what the f*** does Egypt have to do with Native Americans? Well, to that I would say you need to brush up on your Nawubian lore. Because if you would read the literature, you would clearly see that the Egyptians walked to North America back when all the continents were connected. Therefore, Native Americans are also Egyptian. See?
Ah, sotto anche gli italiani, no, pure gli italiani sono egiziani, quindi anch'io sono egiziano.
Makes sense, you idiot. Now, the
Sono dell'Atena.
Nubians left New York to escape their problems, but then they found themselves in a whole mess of other problems in Georgia. Specifically, they kept butting heads with local officials over zoning laws. You see, the Nubians kept building random Egyptian shit without any regard for zoning or safety regulations.
Ah, bene. Quindi, come dire, opere no, ecomostri, ecco qua, ecomostri si chiama quando queste cose del genere.
Last nightclub set up in one of the pyramids.
The centerpiece of the Putnam County property is a
Nightclub.
nightclub the group opened in October. At midday, it was in high decibel preparation for an upcoming party. Outside, there were parked 3 stretch limousines.
York argued that since they were on sovereign native land, that they didn't need to abide by the government zoning laws, which, as you can imagine, did not sit well with the sheriff's office. They also had a yearly week-long festival dedicated to York
Pure
that would attract
festival, mamma
thousands
mia.
of people, which obviously caused chaos in Putnam County where the ranch was located. But the problems with the Nubians went much deeper than them just being annoying. There were concerns that they were essentially trying to take control of the county by infiltrating the government and bringing in a bunch of people to create a voting bloc that would influence local politics in their favor. One journalist wrote, Dwight York's purpose was to take over the state of Georgia politically by moving in all of his followers, just like the Rajneesh in Oregon. That same journalist would later go on to receive multiple death threats due to his coverage on the Nawubians, which was extensive. I mean, at the end of the day, this stuff is bad, but it's not like York was diddling kids or anything. Okay, maybe he...
Ah! Benissimo!
was diddling kids. And on top of that, the good old ATF also suspected that the Nubians were stockpiling illegal weapons. Hey,
Ah,
wait a minute. This sounds familiar. A guy who claims to be a direct link to God moves a bunch of his followers to a compound in the middle of nowhere and then attracts the attention of
sì,
federal law enforcement who suspects him of diddling kids and
sì,
stockpiling weapons.
sì.
Where have I heard this before?
Sì.
Not only was York pissing off local law enforcement, he was also being investigated by the ATF and the FBI since he was in Brooklyn, okay? This investigation had been going on for years. But everyone was kind of reluctant to step in because they didn't want another Waco on their hands. They knew if they were going to bust down the doors of Tamari, they needed some rock-hard proof. And it wouldn't be too long before they got it.
Oh.
One day, the FBI got a call from Jacob York, Malachi's own son. Jacob had been spending the last few years running a support group for ex-Nawobians, and they brought forth a mountain of allegations.
Vendetta?
This is exactly the smoking gun that the feds needed to go after York and his followers. So the FBI and the Putnam County Sheriff's Department spent over a year planning a good old-fashioned raid on the compound.
Oh
On May
cazzo.
8th, 2002, it was finally time to invade Tamari. The feds got together a massive team that hadn't been seen since Waco. 80 FBI agents, 80 SWAT members, 69 deputy sheriffs, snipers, helicopters, multiple armored vehicles, all surrounded the Nawobians' compound. This
Mamma
time,
mia.
they made sure to catch the Nawobians by surprise and went in at a time when most of the members left the compound to go into town. Then, bam! One of those armored vehicles rammed through the gates of
Madonna.
Tamari, and they were fully prepared for a potential armed standoff. Luckily, that didn't happen. All the Nawobians surrendered peacefully, and York was arrested. He was
Okay.
later charged with 74 counts of child molestation, 20 counts of aggravated molestation, 4 counts of statutory, 2 counts of sexual exploitation of minor, and 5 counts of enticing a child for sexual purposes,
Benissimo, proprio un pedofilo. Ok.
amounting to 114 charges in all. Now, I should mention
Madonna santa.
that there was no physical or DNA evidence that anyone in the compound had been sexually abused by York, and some of York's accusers later recounted their testimonies. So it was kind of hard to tell what was true and to what degree it was true. Some people believe this whole thing was a setup, a conspiracy between racist law enforcement and disgruntled former Nawobians to take down York. Which, I would be inclined to believe if he wasn't already arrested for diddling kids 30 years prior. York initially pleaded guilty to molestation, but he would later withdraw his guilty plea, claiming that he had only confessed after being tortured by law enforcement. York then showed up to court wearing a full Indian tribal headdress
Ma cioè...
and demanded to be tried in a tribal court. Quote, "I would like to be transferred to members of my tribe. I'm asking that the court recognize that I am an indigenous person. I am a Moorish Cherokee, and I cannot get a fair trial if I'm being tried by settlers or Confederates." Surprisingly, that didn't work. So, York decided to try another tactic. This mother sucker tried to claim diplomatic immunity. He tried to convince the court that he was a diplomat to Liberia, which the Liberian government denied. But when it was all said and done, York ended up in the same place where he started this story. Prison! He was sentenced to 135 years in prison on...
lei... lo sapete che pure sto Charles Taylor mo in prigione, tipo per crimini di guerra, quindi per dirvi che con che persone collaborava, La sua data di rilascio è del 2000... Ok, mi sa che questo qua non vedrà, non uscirà, non uscirà mai più di prigione, come dire. 2120, ci vorrà ancora un po'. Ma cioè... Ma no. Comunque sì, sto Charles Taylor ormai in prigione per crimini di guerra e vabbè, c'è anche che mo la Liberia, tipo, sì, fino al 2024 aveva come presidente George Weah, lo
4 counts
salutiamo.
of racketeering, 6 counts of child molestation. Since he went to prison, the Nawobians have been diligently trying to get their leader out. If you visit their website, it's a jumbled mess of information calling for their leader to be freed. Anyways, let's move on.
Vabbè. House of Yahweh.
Herpes virus Up to 90% of the people have it in
l'herpes.
America. Herpes virus. Well, how could we get like this?
This is Bill Hawkins, who would later be known as Israel Hawkins. Now, at first glance, he looks like a kind old man. You might even describe him as Santa-like. Let me tell you, this guy is no Santa Claus, okay? Instead of giving gifts to children, he gave them lifelong psychological trauma. His story starts in 1977. Bill Hawkins just left the Abilene Police Department after 10 years. Well, I guess leave isn't the right word. He was forced to resign after being caught with alcohol in the squad car. Now, personally, I don't really see what the issue was. I can't even drive unless I have at least a light buzz going on. After his departure from the police department, Bill hit rock bottom. He fell into a deep depression.
Sì, aspetta. Ragazzi, scusate, mi ero un attimo distratto. Scusate.
One day, his wife convinced him to attend a religious retreat run by a group called the Worldwide Church of God. Bill was completely mesmerized by the group's leader, Herbert Armstrong. Now, old Herbert was like the OG televangelist. This dude was like a rock star. When he talked, everybody else shut up. And when he stopped, the room would erupt in applause. Bill, just like everybody else in the room, couldn't take his eyes off of Armstrong. But there was something more than admiration in his eyes. It was jealousy, with a slight hint of horniness, because let's be honest, this guy was an absolute snack. You see, Bill had an addiction to attention. When he saw all the praise and admiration Armstrong was getting, Bill knew that he had to get some of that for himself. Now, I think I should do another one of my sidebars to quickly talk about the Worldwide Church of God, since its doctrine heavily influenced Bill Hawkins' later religious endeavors. First of all, they are widely considered to be a cult, and Armstrong was embroiled in a ton of controversies by the end of his life. The WCG believed that British people were descendants of the Hebrews from the Bible, that black people were cursed by God. Armstrong also claimed to be a prophet and rejected a lot of mainstream Christian teachings, and he incorporated some more aspects of Judaism into his beliefs. On top of all that, he also made a bunch of incorrect doomsday predictions. So, yeah, cool guy. Either way, Bill Hawkins walked out of that retreat a changed man. He finally found the meaning he had been searching for. He decided that he was going to become a man of God, and also become super rich and famous along the way. So Bill joined the Worldwide Church of God and quickly worked his way up, eventually becoming a preacher. But his career as a preacher in the WCG came to an abrupt end when Armstrong appointed a new elder who wasn't too fond of Bill. All of a sudden, he was no longer allowed to give sermons, and his power in the church had diminished. It wouldn't be long before Bill left the church altogether. Bill thought that the WCG was his ticket to the fame and power that he always craved. Now, he had to start from square one. Listen, man, starting a cult is hard, especially the beginning. Luckily, though, Bill had a brother who already laid the groundwork for him. After receiving a prophetic vision, Bill's brother Jacob left his life in America to move to Israel, where he studied the Bible for 7 years. When he got back to Texas, Jacob changed his name to Yaqub and started the House of Yahweh. Bill then changed his name to Israel and became ordained as a minister in his brother's church. But Bill wasn't satisfied with playing second fiddle to his bro, so he broke ties with Yaqub and established his own branch of the House of Yahweh at the trailer park he owned. Israel took everything he learned from his brother and from Herbert Armstrong and started proselytizing to the residents of his trailer park. And he was able to snag a few followers, but there wasn't any real growth. And it makes sense, you know, these beliefs were very alien to what the people of Texas were used to. Hawkins' belief system was a weird mix of Judaism and Christianity. Followers wore traditional Jewish clothes and stuck to a kosher diet. Israel also claimed that him and his brother Yaqub were the two witnesses described in the book of Revelation who would usher in the end of the world.
But he says you will preach this message to all the world, and then the end will come. And that's in Matthew 24, written about us.
Stop me if you've heard this before, but only Israel and his followers would survive and rebuild the earth. Hawkins claims that he received this knowledge through prophetic dreams.
Ma perché c'è questo è sì, Johnny Depp in come si chiama? Sì, Nightmare.
Yeah, people weren't really clamoring to adopt these beliefs, so growth was slow for a while. But all of that would change in 1982, when Israel took out an ad in the National Enquirer. You know the National Enquirer, the respectable publication that runs stories like this and this.
Un po' il nostro, come il nostro chi, ok?
Now, this was a genius move because readers of the Inquirer are exactly the type of people to be sucked into a schizo cult, and Israel saw a huge uptick in followers after this. Thousands of people from all over the world flocked to Abilene, Texas to hear the word. Hawkins started evicting tenants from his trailer park that weren't members to make room for his followers, and even built a compound in the middle of the park. And of course, as his following grew, so did his ego. Israel wrote his own version of the Bible and had his followers legally change their names to Hawkins to show their loyalty.
Since 1993, 253 people have gone over to the local courthouse and changed their last names to Hawkins.
Oh, and his ego wasn't the only thing wrong. So was his horniness. By the 1990s, after
Bene.
being caught cheating on his wife with multiple members of his flock, Hawkins openly advocated for polygamy, saying at one point, women either had to accept it or forfeit heaven. And if that wasn't bad enough, Hawkins used this threat of excommunication to pressure young women into becoming part of his harem of wives. Former members claimed that Hawkins had 24 wives and who knows how many children.
40.
Eventually, the non-stop backshots started to change Israel. By the late 90s, he started making a bunch of doomsday predictions.
As far as I know, the house of Yahweh is the only ones that have this knowledge of when the world is actually going to end.
And when is that?
2002. 4/5 of the world's population is going to be wiped out between now and about the middle of the year 2002. Mark it on your calendar.
This was obviously wrong. He also said that the world would end in 2006, 2007, 2008, and most recently in 2016.
Cioè, quindi, quando l'Italia vincerà i mondiali, il mondo finirà. Quando ci sarà Ciao Darwin 5, il mondo finirà. Quando ci saranno le dimensioni del mio caos, il mondo... Vabbè, cambiava sempre anno. Cioè, il frattazzo... Cioè, sì, ma dai, il frattazzo che diceva... Aspetta... mi sono scordato che devo mettere... Aspetta.
Dirà la verità su questi due mondi contrapposti. Adesso sì. Ricordati che devi morire! Ma che cretino! Ghiottadore! Ma io sto lavorando e lei se ne esce per dire queste fesserie. Lei la deve smettere di avere questo atteggiamento che è completamente fuori luogo rispetto a quello che sto facendo io. Ha capito? Si comporti come si deve. Chiaro? Bene, grazie, per favore. Ricordati che devi morire! Ma ne stavo parlando giù! Che fa qua sopra? Senta, io ho la necessità di proseguire. Prima c'è la cosa dell'avatar e per l'amore del cielo lo so che lei in fondo è un bambino e va bene così, ma adesso se cortesemente mi fa lavorare... Ma lo sai che ore sono, lo sai! E ora che te ne vai! Pazzo incosciente! Ma lo sai che tra 1000 e un giorno, 3 ore 20 secondi, 19, 18,
17. Scusate, è troppo bello, è troppo... cioè.
Amazingly, most of...
Quando tornerà Ciao Darwin, il mondo finirà, penso anche che dovesse... Le lezioni... scusate.
his followers still stuck around despite all of these failed predictions, but Hawkins wouldn't be able to stay on top forever. Now, you would think all of these failed doomsday predictions would be the end of Israel Hawkins, like everybody would just leave, but his downfall come from a completely different place. The House of Yahweh was completely against medicine, and any medical issues were handled within the compound. This policy is what would lead to the unraveling of the cult. In 2006, 17-year-old Lisa Johnson passed away during childbirth because the cult's midwives improperly delivered the baby. She could have survived had she gotten medical treatment, but the midwives refused to get her outside help. Lisa's family sued the House of Yahweh, which led to a long, drawn-out court case where the cult was forced to turn over countless documents and records, revealing just how deranged and shady Israel actually was. 3 years before Lisa Johnson passed away, another girl, Terry Gideon, also passed away after cult members with zero medical experience attempted to perform surgery on her. I'm not going to get too graphic, but basically she had an infection in her leg, and then they tried to remove the infection and she bled out. Around that same time, law enforcement started investigating the compound, and the remains of another child, this time a baby, were found nearby. The cause of death was
Oh, cazzo.
malnourishment. He was 1 month old, and it just kept getting worse and worse from there. One of the church's elders, Jedediah Hawkins, was convicted on molestation charges. He had been in the process of marrying his 14-year-old stepdaughter when she went to the police and told them that he had been abusing her for years. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. Now, even though the police couldn't charge Israel personally for any of these things, they knew they had to do something. So, in February
Assedio?
of 2008,
D'altro assedio?
officials got a warrant to arrest Hawkins on charges of bigamy and violating child labor laws. Luckily, the feds had learned their lesson from the absolute cluster shit that was Waco. Instead of raiding the compound this time, they waited. They waited 3 whole months until Hawkins finally left the compound and went into town, where he was promptly arrested and taken to jail without incident. He was later found complicit for all of those previous crimes and received life imprisonment. No, I'm kidding. He paid an $8,000 fine and got 15 months probation.
Bene!
This prevails again. Luckily, though, this whole thing was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of the members of the church, and many of them left. But Israel continued preaching, even with his much smaller following, and claiming that the world would end soon. Now, weirdly enough, he also claimed that he couldn't...
Scusate, lo devo mettere ogni volta che sento
E va bene così, ma adesso se cortesemente mi fa lavorare e la...
Ma lo sai che ore sono, lo sai!
E ora che te ne vai!
Pazzo incosciente! Ma lo sai che tra 1000 e un giorno, 3 ore, 3 ore e 20 secondi, 19, 18, 17. Il mondo finirà! Lo dice il calendario Maya, che il mondo finirà! Ha capito? E tu, tu. Pentiti, non sei pronto. Non sei pronto.
Scusi, ma perché stai in giro?
Scusate, è diventato il mio nuovo fetish, è una nuova running gag in sti video,
not die, which was proven wrong when he died. Passed away in 2021, but some of his followers continue to spread his message to this day. They even have a YouTube channel that still posts occasionally.
Ma cioè, Happy Science.
Since about, I'd say, 1949, Japan has been the world's leading purveyor of weird shit. Cults are no exception. Ryuho Okawa was born Akashi Nakakawa. He grew up with an extremely strict father that had insanely high expectations of him. So naturally, he decided from a young age to become a lawyer. There was only one issue. Okawa was not very smart, so he couldn't get into law school. Instead, he accepted a position at a company called Toman Devices Corporation. But before he started working, on the 23rd of March 1981, Okawa had a spiritual awakening.
Come sempre, risveglio spirituale così a caso.
Something that he would describe as his Buddha enlightenment. Quote, I was suddenly struck by the feeling that somebody was trying to speak with me. I hurried to get note cards and a pencil, and the pencil started to move as if it had its own life, and wrote good news, over and over again. When I asked who was speaking, my pencil signed Saint Nico. This was the first of many spiritual encounters Okawa would have throughout his life. A few years later, while on a work trip to New York, Okawa realized he wasn't actually the dumb schmuck that he once thought he was. He became fluent in English in just a few months and started reading literally thousands of books. Everything from the Iliad to Mind Equals Blown by Matt.
Perché cosa? About to... Ok. Perché c'è l'Iliade, vabbè.
Once he had all that delicious knowledge stored in his cranium, he started publishing his own books about the answers to life, the universe, and everything else. In June of 1986, on the advice of the many spirits he communicated with, Okawa quit his job and became a bipolar schizophrenic full-time. He continued writing dozens of books and founded his own organization called Happy Science. When he first launched it, it was a pretty exclusive club, and it was more difficult to get into than your mom's pants. Actually, those are pretty easy to get into, so never mind. Potential members had to read at least 10 works produced by Okawa, and then they had to complete an entrance exam followed by a personality test. People who failed at any point were banned from ever joining. Now, most cults tend to accept any schmuck who believe the leader's bullshit, so it seems kind of counterintuitive to let so few people in. But it was actually genius, because by making it more difficult to enter, Okawa gave Happy Science a cool, exclusive vibe that attracted people of high status. Okay, so we know that Okawa talked to spirits, but what was his actual belief system? Well, in the early days, Happy Science was basically your standard doomsday cult. Okawa's first few books were all apocalypse coded. Okawa believed that the end of the world would be caused by Earth's reaction to mankind's negativity, and Happy Science were the chosen few who would save the world from destruction by changing the hearts and minds of the people and helping them find true happiness, which would in turn prevent the apocalypse and bring us into a utopian age. Honestly, that doesn't sound too bad. Sounds kind of nice. Well, just wait. The central figure of the Happy Science religion is a being called El Cantare. Okay, so basically there's a dimension full of powerful spirits that have the ability to greatly impact events on Earth. And the most powerful of these spirits is El Cantare, who created the modern human, and he has also taken human form many times. Once as the Buddha, and most recently as Ryuho Okawa. Okay, so basically...
Come sempre tutte queste robe che no, si trasforma questo spirito prima in, ne so, Giulio Cesare, poi in Garibaldi, poi in Pippo Franco.
Okawa believed that he was the highest divine being in existence. Thus, his ability to communicate with spirits of dead people like Buddha, Jesus, and even Freddie Mercury. I'm not even joking, he has a whole video where he claims to have been possessed by the spirit of Margaret Thatcher.
Tra tutte le persone di cui ti potevi fare... Margaret Thatcher! Cazzo!
If was her.
One of the greatest prime minister in Great Britain. Everybody acknowledged it.
Not just iron lady, a hot iron lady.
Hot iron. Hot iron.
Eva! Come in! Intrusion!
Ma che è un cazzo di comico, ma che cazzo è? Ragazzi, il nostro si fa... ragazzi, vi dico che il nostro domani si farà... quando... Se dove... Quale politico... Quale ex... mi farò possedere dallo spirito di... aspetta, fatevi venire in mente un ex capo di Francesco Cossiga, ecco qua. Dirò che Ustica è tutta una boiata. No.
Attack them!
Attack them!
Never fly!
This guy's great.
Yoda!
I love this guy. Starting in 1990, Okawa decided to expand Happy Science. After all, he was going to need a lot more people if he was going to rebuild civilization. So entering the group became a lot easier, and Okawa got rid of a lot of the barriers to entry from the earlier days. At the same time, the group was implementing their Sunrise 90 missionary project, which was meant to spread the message of Happy Science all over Japan, which resulted in their numbers exploding. It was through this project that Happy Science entered the mainstream. And on the 7th of March, 1991, the Japanese government officially recognized his religion. And you know what that means? No taxes, baby.
Bene!
All the money he saved from not paying taxes.
Sopra la legge.
One of the largest advertising campaigns in Japanese history. This campaign led to a lot of attention from the mainstream media. So yeah, it kind of backfired from that point of view. But at the same time, Okawa didn't give a shit, because his ads were paying dividends. By the end of 1991, Happy Science had 5.6 million members, which was 5 million more than they had at the beginning of the year.
Con 5 milioni di membri, aspetta, cerchiamo mo le città italiane più popolose. Allora, comuni d'Italia per popolazione, allora, aspetta, allora, con una la madò, allora, ragazzi, c'hanno più della città, della nostra città con più abitanti che è Roma.
Happy Science became a money printer, and a lot of that cash came from the publishing branch of the company, specifically from books written by Okawa, two of which went on to be bestsellers. And according to some estimates, he had netted as much as $45 million in a single year just from the book sales alone. But Okawa didn't stop at just books. Happy Science started dabbling in other mediums too. In 1991, they released their own anime called...
Perfetto, un anime. Come quello là, ho un cirrico, cioè...
Shiawasate Nanu. It's about a young, unhappy boy who, through the help of an angel, finds his way to happiness. I actually watched this and, it's not bad. It's kind of like if a Studio Ghibli film was made by an opium addict. In 1994, Happy Science started dipping their toes into full movies, adapting Okawa's book, The Terrifying Predictions of Nostradamus, into a feature-length film. The movie serves as a possible illustration of the apocalypse as gods and angels try to save you.
Aspetta, qualcuno ha detto Apocalisse, qualcuno ha detto Apocalisse, qualcuno ha detto Apocalisse, qualcuno ha detto... Ecco qua.
Ma perché sta in giro vestito da frattazzo da velletri?
Non mi interrompere! Il nostro potrà essere un futuro di conoscenza condivisa da ognuno, oppure una fine di distruzione letale, la fine di tutto. Ci attende una rinascita o la devastazione, l'illuminazione o la devastazione, alla fine.
Vabbè.
Humanity by spreading happiness. Or something like that. Honestly, I don't really know. I tried watching it and just got more confused. Now, the apocalypse was one of the central tenets in Happy Science, but in the
bene, altri frattazzi.
distancing himself from the idea. And in 1996, he stopped talking about it completely. He told his followers that thinking about the apocalypse would only ensure its arrival, so just shut up about it and think positive. Now, this seems like a huge left turn that came out of nowhere, but there's actually a very good reason for him distancing himself from doomsday. On March 20th, 1995, the apocalyptic cult Aum Shinrikyo tried to speedrun Armageddon by releasing a toxic gas in the Tokyo subway
Sì,
that killed
infatti,
14 people
come ho già
and
detto,
injured
Aum
over
Shinrikyo.
1,000. It was, to this day, the worst terrorist attack in Japanese history. So yeah, it kind of makes sense that Okawa didn't want to be associated with them. By the late 2000s, Okawa started getting involved in politics. In 2009, he founded the Happiness Realization Party and started running for the Japanese parliament. Now, let's talk about the HRP's platform. First of all, Okawa vowed to double the Japanese population, resulting in 300 million living in Japan by 2030. And that is the sanest policy he had, because he also vowed that he would invade North Korea because, and this is true, Okawa could read Kim Jong-un's mind and saw that he was planning to nuke Tokyo. It doesn't stop there. He also claimed that China was masterminding this whole plot, and he vowed to invade them as well. You would think they would
invadiamo tutto.
a ton of seats in parliament based on this extremely based and reasonable platform. But when the elections were all said and done, they won a grand total of zero seats.
Zero, bene.
Complete failure to break into politics. Happy Science was still going as strong as ever. In 2015, they boasted 10 million members in Japan alone, and even opened their own university in the city of Chosei. These numbers might have been fudged a little bit. Osaka University conducted a study and found that Happy Science had only about 38,000 people in Japan, which, according to my calculations, is much less than 10 million. But hey, 38,000 people is a lot. That's like half your mom's body count. Okawa also...
Allora, aspetta, torniamo a... Devo sempre tornare in pagine che chiudo, apro. Allora, 38.000 nella classifica delle città più popolose italiane sarebbero al... not count limited... Che cazzo è successo? Vabbè, comunque si troverebbero...
claimed that they had a huge following outside of Japan, but that just wasn't true. They were virtually unknown. That is until the year 2020. Now, I don't
Oh,
know if you guys remember
2020?
this, but there was this virus going around that was totally
Sì.
fake and
Come
not a
dire?
big deal, but also killed millions of people. It was a
Un
very
certo
big deal.
Corona.
A lot of people were scared, except for followers of Happy Signs, who went to the middle of Times Square at the height of the pandemic and proclaimed that they could protect people from the disease. Now, according to the mainstream media, the vaccine for this virus wasn't released until December 2020, or at least that's what they want you to believe. Because in reality, Happy Science developed the vaccine far before that. But this wasn't the typical vaccine that is injected into your blood through a needle. Okay, this one involved praying at one of Happy Science's temples, and of course, giving a generous donation. After this whole situation, Happy Science started getting heavy scrutiny from media outside of Japan, and Western outlets started looking at them with a magnifying glass. The most scathing thing to come out during this time was a New York Times article which accused Happy Science of scamming their own followers and basically being a pyramid scheme. The article was particularly bad for the organization because it had testimony from Ryuho Okawa's own son, Hiroshi. Hiroshi had a falling out with his dad, and since then he's dedicated his whole life to exposing Happy Science on his YouTube channel. What is absolutely insane is that Ryuho sued his own son for defamation and won. Hiroshi was forced to pay Happy Science 1.32
Ma come di prima, cioè tutti sti figli che odiano i loro padri, cioè.
million yen in
Proprio sì, che
damages,
quelli.
which luckily is only like $12, but still. Now, legally, this was a win for Ryuho, but is it really a win when you have to sue your own son? Listen, I'm
No.
speaking from experience here because my dad tried to sue me for defamation after I talked about him in one of my YouTube videos. So, this is just a loss for everybody. A year later, Ryuho would take another massive L in the form of death. On March 2nd, 2022, Ryuho Okawa passed away from a heart attack at the age of 66. And since his death was so unexpected, he never chose a successor. And the creepy thing is, I can't find anything about who took over the cult after he passed away. And I know they're still active because their website is updated pretty regularly. But from what I've seen, they're just acting like he's still alive.
Remnant Fellowship Church.
The core principle of Way Down is found on the first pages of the book. You have, of course, your stomach, then you have your hurting heart. They're located so close to each other. I mean, your stomach and your heart.
Gwen Shambler is not your typical cult leader.
Ma che è? Ma sti capelli, sta faccia, mamma mia. Già vedo, urla leader di una setta da ogni poro. Cioè, ma no.
He was a registered dietitian and a faculty member of the University of Tennessee.
Era una dietista.
By all means, she had a normal, successful middle-class life. So, how does a person like this end up turning into a cult leader? It all started in the early 80s. Gwen had suddenly put on 20 pounds, and despite dieting and exercising like a freak, she was unable to lose it. She embarked on a mission and spent years trying to figure out how to get thin and stay thin. What she realized is that the reason people were fat is because they ate too much. Truly revolutionary stuff. Okay, there's more to it than that. Gwen basically combined her Christian faith with her diet and said that people needed to only eat enough to live and to rely on God for the rest.
I'm going to tell you that I believe it's a spiritual addiction. I think what we have not addressed is that this is a void inside of us. We were made to be addictive. And I'm not asking people not to be addicted. I'm saying transfer over this addiction to God.
Gwen said in one of her books, instead of emphasizing the caloric content of food, I encourage you to focus on your natural internal hunger control. But more importantly, your focus will be trained to turn towards the will of God as it relates to food. With this epiphany, Gwen started the Way Down Workshop in 1986 to teach people how to live according to this lifestyle.
The Way Down Workshop is about putting foods in its proper place. We don't bow down to it. And you don't eat until you feel physiological hunger.
At first, she ran it out of the Bellevue Baptist Church. But in 1995, she had partnered with 1,000 different churches in the U.S., Canada, and even England. To be honest, I don't understand how British people could be overweight when this is their standard cuisine. In 1997, Gwen released her magnum opus, the Way Down Diet Book, which sold 1.3 million copies. This was basically the the holy book for middle-aged suburban white women, and Gwen started to be looked at as less of a diet coach and more as a quasi-religious figure. And to be honest, it kind of got to her head. So her entire life, Gwen had been a member of the Church of Christ, but since they didn't allow female religious leaders, she decided to start her own church, the Remnant Fellowship. It wouldn't take long for Gwen to become a full-on...
Aspetta, ora lo dico. È la versione malvagia di Dolly Parton, sta donna, sembra,
Not
all'aspetto.
only was she making a fortune by financially exploiting her congregation, she also started controlling what her followers ate, how they spent their money, and even who they married. But the most controversial thing was her views on capital punishment.
Former Remnant members Terry and David Phillips say Shamblin not only encouraged spankings, but stressed they must be severe.
That you had to make the spanking count.
If they're not scared of a spanking, he didn't spank them. If you haven't really spanked them yet, you don't love them. You love yourself.
They had to feel pain.
If members disagreed with any of these teachings and wanted to leave the Remnant Fellowship, the church would threaten to take their children away from them. But all that stuff mostly stayed internal. But in 2003, the world would find out about the degeneracy that goes on inside the church. In October of 2003, Joseph and Sonia Smith, two of Gwen Shamblin's most loyal disciples, were arrested after the death of their son. He had been starved, severely beaten, and locked in a closet for days, which apparently was a regular occurrence in that house. Now, Gwen denies ever advocating for hitting kids or locking them in rooms, but a leaked tape says otherwise.
Does Remnant advocate locking children up for lengthy periods of time?
Absolutely not.
I have a tape of a telephone call between you and Sonia Smith.
This is Sonia Smith in Atlanta.
Sonia!
I got to speak with Ted Anker. That's you.
I did exactly what Ted told me to do. Take everything out of this room. We got everything out of there, and locked him in there from that Friday until Monday, and only left him in the room with his Bible.
That tape has been made or tampered or whatever. I totally deny
that
has ever been said by anyone. And that's
Oh cazzo, no. Sorry. Ok, cambio di postazione.
miracle. You've got a child that's going from just bizarre down to in control. So praise God.
The Smiths were found guilty of murder, and on February 16, 2007, 3 years after the death of their son, they both received life in prison. After the conviction, the Fellowship Church created a whole ass website called thesmithsareinnocent.com, defending the Smiths and saying they did nothing wrong. This controversy did very little to slow down Gwen's empire. This broad was raking in millions of dollars a year from book sales, and of course, very generous donations from her followers. Her net worth at her peak was estimated to be around $20 million, and she even had her own private plane, which she learned to fly. But as the saying goes, it goes up, it's come down. In this case, literally. On May 29th, 2021, Gwen's plane crashed, killing her and 6 others. She was not flying the plane, by the way. When this happened, HBO was actually in the middle of making a docu-series about Gwen, and when it released, the church took another massive hit to their reputation. Now, despite all of that, the church continues to run to this very day, and it's led by Gwen's daughter, although membership is a lot smaller than it used to be.
Ok. Adidam.
Adidam is a religion started in the 70s by a guy named Adida Samraj.
Ma che cos'è? Sembra Enrico Ruggeri.
A.k.a. Da Friedjon, a.k.a. Bubba Friedjon, a.k.a. The Avatar. His real name is Franklin Jones, and I gotta say, this dude is probably my second least favorite Franklin. If I've learned anything from my hours researching cults, it's that random white people who become Hindu gurus, it's just a recipe for disaster. It never works out.
In realtà le sette in generale, ma soprattutto quelle sui finti guru hindu.
And Adidam is no exception. There's a long list of controversies with this cult going all the way back to the 70s. But good luck about reading about any of them, because the cult has been extremely successful in scrubbing negative things about them off the internet. In fact, if you Google Adida controversies, The first few results are from the website adidacontroversies.org, which is owned by
Però siete di controversie.
the Adidam cult. Genius level play. But unlike most YouTube
Beh, almeno sono onesti, come
these
dire.
days, I go past the first two Google results. So I was able to dig up some stuff. So let's start at the beginning. Franklin Jones was born in my hometown of Queens, New York. In 1963, he moved to California to study at Stanford. This was the height of the free love movement, or the free drugs movement. So, of course, he started experimenting with LSD. And by experimenting, I mean he was experimented on. He participated in a study on the effects of LSD and psilocybin at the local veterans hospital. What he probably didn't know is that he was an unwitting participant in a CIA project called MK Ultra.
Mi era venuto in mente quando ho sentito questa roba tipo di test, sì.
Bet you weren't expecting that. I don't know how that's relevant yet, but it's kind of weird how MK Ultra kind of permeates like everything. For the next few years, Jones would bounce around different religions until he finally landed on Hinduism. By 1974, he changed his name to Bubba Freejohn and claimed that he was the divine lord in human form, an avatar of God. He taught his followers that in order to reach enlightenment like himself, one needed to break conventional sexual and behavioral norms. What this meant was essentially becoming a complete sexual degenerate freak, so that you could
Mi ricorda qualche setta.
separate yourself from the world or something. I don't know. He wrote a book about his beliefs called Garbage and the Goddess, and soon degenerates from all over the world flocked to Adida's ashram to engage in the dirty stuff described in his book. Okay, I'm talking orgies, I'm talking gay stuff, I'm talking joking, edging, gooning, nothing was off limits. And before you go thinking, hey, that sounds like fun, there was also a dark side. Adida
Una cosa che inizia con P.
encouraged his followers to let go of their previous relationships so that they could fully commit to the Adidam. This meant many people abandoned their family and friends so they could fully devote themselves to the Divine One. Saying that Adida had a massive ego is an understatement. He ruled over his followers with an iron fist. Former followers of Jones have accused him of using drugs to brainwash his followers and also psychologically torturing people who disobeyed him. Now, despite looking like a gender-neutral Mr. Potato Head, our boy Bubba Freejohn apparently had Riz. Lots of Riz. Tons of women were constantly clamoring to have sex with this unripe yam of a man. And the more backshots he did, the more John started to view women as nothing more than objects meant to be used and abused for his desires. One of his former students wrote, "The guru was physically abusive towards women, pushing and slapping them around on occasion, some of whom needed to be hospitalized. And it wasn't just women. Men were also ordered to undergo humiliating sexual activities in front of the guru and his inner circle." The purpose of all this stuff was supposedly to rid people of their worldly attachments and moralities, but not everyone agreed with his approach. By the mid-80s, multiple lawsuits alleging sex abuse were filed by former members. Before this, the Adidam just kind of floated under the radar.
Abusi sessuali, abusi, la terra dei cachi.
But these suits brought forth a massive wave of negative media attention. Around the same time, Jones decided to move to a small island off the coast of Fiji with his most devoted followers. Now, is it kind of weird that he decided to do this around the time when all these lawsuits and controversies started to pop up? I don't know. But what I do know is that, sadly, these lawsuits never went anywhere, and the scathing media coverage didn't do much to detract Adida's followers. The guru continued to live in Fiji until 2008, when he ironically passed away at the age of 69 due to a heart attack, which I can only imagine was the result of too many backshots. Now, I know you shouldn't speak ill of the dead, and I'm sorry to say it, but this guy was a real putz. Despite that, his teachings continue to be spread by his followers today, and it's estimated that the Adidam still has around 1,000 members.
Bene. Ramtas School of Enlightenment.
Listen, I know a thing or two about crazy women, okay? I married one for 6 years, and let me tell you, the next co-leader we're going to talk about makes my ex-wife look like a saint. Ramtas School of Enlightenment was founded by Jay-Z. No, not that Jay-Z, this lady, Jay-Z Knight.
Ok. che possiamo notare Maronna Santa che la sua chirurgia plastica, come
Was
dire.
born Judy Hampton and had a pretty horrible childhood, according to her. Not only did she grow up poor, but she also said that she was, quote, brutally raped at age 4. By the time she was in her 30s, she was married with 2 children, working at a dead-end job in Washington. But her whole life would change one day in 1977 when Ramtha visited her. What the heck is a Ramtha, you ask yourself? Well,
Cos'è?
Ramtha is an ancient spirit also known as the Enlightened One. We'll talk about him more in a sec. Ramtha told Judy that he would help her get over the ditch of her own limitations. He also said that she was in serious danger and that she needed to leave her house in 5 days or something terrible would happen. From then on, Ramtha continued to visit Judy. Sometimes he would even speak through her and give advice to others. A year after her initial meeting with Ramtha, Judy started charging people money to consult the spirit. In 1980, while married to her 4th husband, not a red flag at all, Judy met a man named Jeffrey Knight. And Ramtha told her that the two of them were soulmates, so she left her husband and kids and married this other dude. Man, this must have been the same spirit that told my ex-girlfriend to sleep with my Uncle Reuben. Bitch. Now, normally, when spirits talk to me, I just ignore them. But you see, Ramtha was no ordinary schmuck spirit. He was once a man, a great warrior who lived 35,000 years ago in the mystical lands of Mongolia.
Ah, proprio a combattere con Genghis Khan.
People, the Lemurians, were conquered and enslaved by Atlantis. You know, like the mythical city that sank to the bottom of the sea. Ramtha led a rebellion.
Ragazzi, ultima notizia. Mamdani, il sindaco di New York, ha citato Mourinho e Balotelli. Ragazzi, io sto adorando Mamdani, cioè... Allora, il problema è che non so se però è che non può diventare presidente perché è nato in Uganda e... Anche se penso cioè, Madonna Santa, con tutto ciò che sta a fare Trump, a sto punto, fatelo candidare comunque, no? Cioè...
against the Atlanteans, which he won, securing freedom for his people. Later, he would reach enlightenment and ascend to a state of quasi-godhood. Well, listen, what or who Ramtha was doesn't matter. What does matter is that Judy Knight was raking in tons of cash from rich schmucks seeking spiritual counsel. By 1988, she made enough money to start her very own school, Ramtha School of Enlightenment. It was a giant fenced-off compound only open to students and staff. According to the website, the school educates on the teachings of Ramtha, which it doesn't call a religion, but a science, the purpose of which is to help people access their inner wisdom and allow them to achieve enlightenment. There was so much enlightening going on in there. You wouldn't believe the amount of enlightening that was happening in these halls. And trust me when I say, enlightening ain't cheap. By 2006, the school was bringing in over $2.5 million a year from its 6,000 students. And it even attracted some celebrities, including Selma Hayek. Selma.
No!
Listen, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows in there. The school came under a lot of scrutiny for brainwashing its students while charging exorbitant fees for classes. That sounds like every other university to me, except for DeVry, of course. David McCarthy, a former student of the school, called Knight a spiritual predator and claimed that her teachings had made him paranoid of being attacked by lizard people. And to be fair, we should all be afraid of that, okay? Our reptilian overlords are coming, ladies and gentlemen. Now, guys, of course we're talking about a cult here, so it was only a matter of time before the sexual misconduct allegations.
Bene! Oggi sette crimini sessuali, ma...
A female student alleged that someone from her school had sexually assaulted her at the age of 15. Charges were brought against 2 members of Ramtha's inner circle, Wayne Allen Geis and Ruth Beverly Martin. Now, Knight was actually able to get the 2 to confess to the molestation in front of an assembly of hundreds of members. But when it came time to testify in court, she claimed that she was in a trance at the time of the confession and that it was actually Ramtha who questioned the couple. And she had no recollection of it. Bro, this sets an absolutely insane courtroom precedent. Today, Knight is still alive and well, and her school is still attended by hundreds of students every year.
Cioè, superior universal lineage.
This is possibly one of the most disturbing cults I've ever looked into, and That's why I saved it for the end. I'm
Ok,
not even going to try
finiamo
to
col
explain this one
botto.
because it's so screwed up. From
Allora,
1989 to 93, 19 boys aged 8 to 14 went missing in Altamira, Brazil. 6 were
oh
found
no,
dead with their bodies brutally mutilated and their organs removed. 8 more were found alive but had their private parts removed. 5 were never found at all. At first, police suspected this was part of some kind of organ trafficking ring, and they would later come to a more sinister
oh
conclusion that these
cazzo.
child abductions were part of some kind of satanic ritual. Keep in mind the late 80s, early 90s.
Ma no, la passione sì, Davide Marotta. Che tra l'altro curiosità, cioè è bello come l'attore che interpreta un neonato sia più vecchia dell'attore dell'attrice che fa la madre.
Peak of the so-called satanic panic, where a bunch of people were making unfounded claims of occult rituals happening. But in this case, it happened to be very, very true. Except these children weren't being sacrificed to the devil, but to aliens. Police were able to track down a group of people connected to the murders, including doctors, businessmen, police officers, and a woman named Valentina Andrade. It turns out that she had ordered these boys to be ritualistically murdered to save the world. It all started in 1981. Valentina de Andrade was contacted by an extraterrestrial who told her that the God from the Bible doesn't exist and that Jesus was actually an alien messiah sent to teach humans about enlightenment and love, but was killed for telling the truth. Oh, and also the world was going to end by the end of the decade and all of mankind would be eradicated. Luckily for Valentina.
Per l'ultima volta in questo video.
Alla fine saremo noi a scrivere l'ultimo capitolo del libro perduto. E come ha scritto Nostradamus, Sursum, Muschium, Malus, Unibus.
Ti ha dato la ricetta, Nostradamus?
Taci tu!
Del tuo nonno.
E allora sappi che io sono venuto qui perché ho un compito. Devo andare a costruire l'arca, capito? Che ci salverà tutti quanti, l'arca della rinascita. Tu, Bonolis, di fronte a tutta questa moltitudine. Pentiti, primo. E secondo, sei pronto tu? Sei pronto per essere salvato?
Faccia lei, basta mi fanno avanti.
Davvero? Sì. Allora, segno, Bonolis per uno. Bonolis.
Vabbè.
She was given exclusive knowledge on how to save herself and others from the rapidly approaching doomsday. Unluckily, the solution was really, really dark. The aliens told her that all males born after 1981 were evil incarnate and they had to be destroyed. And anybody who helped her destroy this evil would escape the apocalypse via a giant spaceship. Equipped with this knowledge, Valentina started proselytizing in her hometown of Altamira, and she somehow started attracting important and powerful members of her community, like police officers, businessmen, and doctors. I don't know how she managed to convince these people to start murdering young boys, but throughout the 80s, they would kidnap homeless orphans and castrate them, and then leave them for dead. Unfortunately, many of these disappearances went unreported since it was a small town, most of the boys didn't have families, and some of the local authorities were in Valentina's pockets. But remember, Valentina said that the apocalypse was set to come in 1989.
Ma che denti c'è, raga? Sì, un po' i denti da squalo, non lo so.
When 1989 came and went, the world was still here, and a lot of her followers started getting suspicious. But she blamed them and said that there weren't enough sacrifices to satisfy the aliens. This is when a good chunk of the members left the cult, and what was left were just the die-hard fanatics. From there, Superior Universal Alignment, as the cult was called, got more brazen with their kidnappings. No one between the ages of 8 to 14 was safe. The police started finding the bodies of kids with their organs missing. So why were their organs missing? That's kind of weird. Well, it turns out that 2 members of Valentina's cult were actually doctors, and they were harvesting and selling these organs from kidnapped kids, which they used to funnel into the cult and fund it. But this would end up being their undoing. The police figured that only a doctor could be so precise in extracting the organs. And wouldn't you know it, 2 doctors randomly showed up in town in 1989 out of nowhere. The 2 doctors were later released due to lack of evidence, and they continued to carry on the same practice at Valentina's direction. But luckily, all the horror would soon come to an end. 2 boys who survived being
Allora.
captured and castrated identified their kidnappers, which led the police to Superior Universal Alignment. 7 people were arrested, including those same 2 doctors who were released, and Valentina herself. The doctors, as well as other members of the SUA, were sentenced to life in prison. Now here's where it gets weird. After the doctors were already convicted and in prison, a guy named Francisco das Chagas came out and confessed to committing 42 murders in the Altamira area, including the ones that the 2 doctors were convicted of. He told the authorities that they shouldn't be paying for crimes that they didn't commit and that it was very sad. Okay, so just to reiterate, this guy had enough of a conscience to not let 2 innocent people take the fall for his crimes, but not enough of a conscience to not murder children. Doesn't make much sense, does it? But then again, it's Brazil. Nothing really makes sense over there. My theory is that this guy was a member of the cult and he was trying to take the fall for the doctors. As for Valentina herself, her house was raided and the police
Come
discovered some
sempre.
pretty weird stuff. Among the evidence discovered are a book written by Valentina where she claims that children born after 1981 are evil, and videotapes that apparently show her performing black magic rituals with several hooded people. Yeah, she was acquitted of all charges and continued to preach about her beliefs on her website until 2021. Some people think that Valentina bribed her way out of trouble while her devoted followers took the fall for her, which I'm inclined to believe myself. Honestly, this one was kind of hard to research because there's not a lot of information in the first place, and the information I could find was all in this obscure ancient language called Portuguese.
Vabbò. Vabbò. Wow, è stato veramente un bel video, è stato veramente qualcosa di molto bello. Vabbè ragazzi, molto interessante. Allora, ci vediamo, non lo so ragazzi, non so che fare oggi. Ciao!